Good evening. Welcome to tonight's webinar presented by Avant Practice Solutions, Navigating Challenges in Practice Management. On the panel with me this evening is Gary Smith. We're also joined by Colleen Sullivan, and of course they are both the authors of a recently published handbook on the principles of healthcare practice management. So tonight's webinar will be talking a lot about the items that are in the book and some really practical information. So we might kick off with the acknowledgement of country. We might move the slide along. Brilliant. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Avant acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. That would be terrific. And don't fret that we are recording the webinar and a copy of the recording will be sent to you afterwards. And as you would have seen in the invite for the webinar, we are doing a draw for, I think it's 5 copies of the handbook that we will be giving away to those people who are attending live this evening. So please hang around till the end where we will announce the winners of the draw. If you weren't lucky enough to win a copy or you haven't already purchased a copy, we will put up a QR code that you can scan and use to order the handbook as well. So one way or another, we'd like to get a copy of this book into everyone's hands. All right, so moving along to our next slide. So about the authors, I feel like they really don't need introduction because they are, in fact, 2 of the most prominent and knowledgeable people when it comes to healthcare practice management in Australia. I feel like this handbook is a continuation of their commitment to that profession and to sharing their knowledge and experience with as many people as possible in this industry. But just to go through, Colleen is OAM, is a certified practice manager, fellow and life member of the AAPM. Colleen has a strong interest in research and has won many awards for her commitment, including being awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia for service to medical administration in 2014. Gary Smith, AM, is considered the guru of practice management in Australia, has extensive career in management of healthcare facilities and provision of healthcare services, predominantly in general practice. He is now, of course, Dr. Gary Smith because in 2021 he was awarded a Doctor of Letters from UNEP for professionalising the profession of practice management. And Gary was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia for his very significant contribution to medical administration and to professional organisations. Thank you both so much for being here with us this evening. So, I guess question for both of you, and Gary, you might like to kick us off. Why have you written this book? What prompted that? And I know it's been quite a massive commitment for both of you, but you obviously saw a need. So what's prompted it?
Anna Maria, and welcome to everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar tonight. And Colleen and I are quite humbled, Anna Maria, that we've been asked to be a part of this evening. This is actually a long journey, Anna Maria. We actually started this, would be 11 years ago, Colleen and I. And we decided 11 years ago, we need to write a book and pull together, you know, tens and tens and tens of years of knowledge, which we can share. Because Colleen and I have the view the knowledge we've gained is not for us to keep. Someone's given it to us, now it's up to us to give it to someone else. And so we're just a custodian of information. So 10 years ago, Colleen and I sat down and we chose the 8 chapters. We chose the sub-chapters and what did we want to talk about in each one of those chapters. So it was pretty well planned. Well, life got away from Colleen and myself and we didn't do much about it. So in January 23, I said, Colleen, we've got to write this book. So we knuckled down and finished it in November of 23. So the writing was about 11 months. And then, of course, the editor got involved around this. But I think the main reason Colleen and I wrote this is because there's two types of knowledge, Anna Maria. There is foundation knowledge, as you know, and there's currency knowledge.
Yes.
So we took the view that we felt that we need to get the foundation knowledge down in writing, which forms the principles, as what that word says, the principles of healthcare practice management. And these are chapters that we need every day. So we thought this would be a great resource book, and it's turned out that way because it's actually a handbook. It's not a book, Anna Maria, because Colleen and I, when we sat down, we struggled with the why.
Yes.
And I think I wrote about 400 pages just on HR, and I said, this is not what this is about. This is about a handbook. This is about the principles. So once Colleen and I got the why right, it flowed very, very easy. So we wanted this handbook with checklists in it that people can use every day. So, Colleen, you got anything else on that?
Yeah, I think you're telling a pretty good story there, Gary. And what the interesting things to me are that in that 10 years, the whole delivery of healthcare in this country changed. And so our chapters changed. And so what we saw as the principles also changed. And I think that, I think we both really got a lot out of that ourselves. But I think too that the thought of the book is that when you say it's a handbook, it's for all areas of the practice. And when we think about there's new doctors starting, new clinical staff starting, admin, the principles apply right across the practice. And I think that you mentioned checklists, and that gives you the opportunity to take this handbook and make it yours for your practice by using the checklists for the things that matter in your practice. Do you agree with that?
Colleen, it's just one other thing which Colleen and I thought about is this is actually a handbook for any healthcare practice.
Exactly.
It could be specialist, it could be a general practice, it could be an allied health, Anna Maria. So it's the general principles of it. So what sat behind our thinking, and there's 3 dot points on the screen. Firstly, was really to help practice managers keep up to date with changing government policy. No, we are getting bombarded in relation to how change management takes place. We've got to learn about change management. We've got to learn about culture. We've got to learn about leadership. And this book covers off on all those fundamentals of, and as Colleen had indicated, what we set up as chapters 10 years ago changed when we revisited in January of 23 because the environment had changed quite often. Well, also in this book, what we've framed it around is what's called an SME, a small to medium enterprise. We are running a business. We just happen to be in health. So the principles of this book are around how do I run a small to medium enterprise? And of course, the last one is the main reason why, one of the main reasons was really how do we attract staff and retain staff in our organisation? Because our staff are such a massive investment accordingly. So they were the 3 top reasons why we thought we would write this book.
Yeah, and I think, Gary, too, those areas are some of the main challenges that healthcare businesses are facing at the moment too, aren't they? I know there's a lot of discussion about, attracting and retaining staff. And so the book helps support a lot of those challenges.
Yes, especially in the HR chapter, where we talk about how do I attract, but more so how do we retain staff? What do we need to do? And we covered off on the life cycle of an employee from induction to all the way around to retention. So there are certain things that we may need to think about when we're talking about retention of staff. It's cheaper to keep the staff we've got, Anna Maria, than it is to go looking for new staff.
It absolutely is, isn't it? No, very good. All right. So, Gary, when we talked about, and Colleen, when we talked about planning for tonight, without it sounding a bit too like a lesson, I am going to reference particular chapters as we go through so that people can go back and refer to those areas.
Right.
As we go. So we're kind of skipping to the end here in chapter 10, where you talk about the foundations of operational excellence. Personally, I'm a big fan of the term operational excellence, but I also know that for some organisations, it can be difficult to define and actually communicate what that means, both internally to your team and to the patients. So what are your thoughts on how do we do that? How do we sort of operationalize operational excellence?
I'd like to go back one step before the operational excellence and start to think about what gives us the operational excellence. It's actually about the vision, the mission, the values, the goals, and the objectives. So when we talk about operational excellence, we have to set the framework, the cultural framework of the organisation. So everyone has an understanding our reason for being. Once we know our reason for being, the operational excellence then will flow through because there will be ownership. Now, what are some of the things we need to do? And these are my top 3 tips. Our top 3 tips are the foundations of operational excellence. I think the first one, of course, is we need to commence with an in-depth examination of our operations and systems. And these are based around things like I spoke about the why before, and I think this is important. Why are we doing what we are doing? And I think that just because we're doing it, it doesn't make it right. Because as I've said previously, practices today are influenced by so many external influences that affect the way in which we deliver our service. And part of this is around revisiting our business operations and the systems. Are they relevant to today or not?
Mm.
I suppose, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's the other side of that, but that's how we've always done it. And it's like how you've always done it may not be suitable anymore.
No, and how often do we hear that? And Colleen, we hear this in our, I would say over nearly 100 years of practice management combined between myself and Colleen. Colleen she's a lot younger than me, Colleen is, so I think I've done the most years. But I think what it is that it's around the fact of just because we've done it this way, it doesn't make it right. So it's really important that we do revisit our systems. I think our appointment systems, workflows and resource allocation are quite critical when we're talking about operational excellence. Are our workflows right? Do we have the right people in the right place? Mm. And part of operational excellence is to ensure that is a direct. Now, we're now talking in primary care now about the introduction of My Medicare. We're going to have to start to think about what's our resource allocation going to be now in our appointment systems and our workflows, because our system is changing. So do we have to upskill people with new skills and look at their scope of practice? So part of this is around operational excellence. And of course, the last one, and I'll get Colleen to talk about this after me, is around governance. Historically, Anna Maria, we talk about clinical governance because our whole practice is based around clinical governance. But really, the big one for us is actually business governance.
Yes, often under considered, isn't it?
Very much under considered. And the chapter 2 in the book talks at length about our business governance around the Corporations Act and those other legislative components that are critical for us to survive in relation to delivering an effective operation. I want to get Colleen if she wants to comment on those 3 points.
Yeah, just they're all so valid, and I mean, even when thinking about the appointment systems, I always think it's the art of appointment scheduling, and it can really make such a difference to the business. And picking up on what you're talking about with the changes in the systems now, Gary, and I mean, that art of appointment scheduling is critical to your business. and it involves, involves the staffing, as you say, the resource allocations and everything, and it can make such a difference. And I think sometimes we take these things, we don't take them seriously, and you can really change the whole economics, the whole business simply in how you do your appointment scheduling. I know that sounds simple, but it's a very important factor. And I think that it is looking at understanding the clinical governance, of course, and the business governance, but knowing that you really do have to have governance in place in your practice so that it's not only compliant, but it is doing the best thing it can for the business. And it's by having these systems in place that will really make a difference to your practice. And I think that's the big thing, the operational excellence, that work on that.
Absolutely. And I think that probably leads very nicely. And Gary, I think you alluded to chapter 2, where we talk more about governance. And I always feel like governance is, it's one of those things that's very important, but I wonder sometimes if some people find it a little bit vague as to what does that actually mean. And I think it's brilliant that in the book you have talked about the 6 pillars of good governance, because I can really kind of latch onto those and say, okay, that makes sense. If those 6 things are in place, then we're going to have good governance. So what are those 6 pillars?
Well, firstly, I think corporate governance, Anna Maria, it's really a system by which we or our business is actually controlled. So it's a control framework, and we'll talk about compliance later on. So the 6 pillars that we identified in the book, the first one is called the rules of law. And the rules of law are really those established a framework of what we can and can't do in our practice. For instance, these are guidelines, these are policies, these are procedures, these are what I'd call house rules. It's the framework by which everyone needs to follow for the delivery of a service. So I call those rules of law. The second one is moral integrity in good corporate governance. And that's really about we make decisions in an ethical way, and we conduct business in an honest and transparent manner. So practices with high moral integrity prioritize their values, such as things like honesty, fairness, and respect for all. So moral integrity is not only good for your internal staff, but also the people who you deal with, especially your patients. The third pillar we've identified is transparency. And I think transparency in corporate governance is most important, because transparency is around communication. Communication not only with your stakeholders, and remember, stakeholders are internal and external, Anna Maria. Internal stakeholders are your staff. External stakeholders are people who you deal with. Could be the supplier, could be government, it could be a patient. But this is all about open communication. And practices that are transparent generally provide accurate and timely information. So transparency, it's also about transparency of finances, strategic directions, etc. The fourth is participation. Now, participation in good corporate governance is also about the involvement of various stakeholders in the decision-making process. Now, it's interesting to note, Anna Maria, that there are practices out there now that have patient forums.
Yes.
That they pay these patients to be part of a forum where they participate in providing feedback and improvement suggestions, and that is for the practice. So that is really good corporate governance. That's a really good participation, which is pillar number 4. Pillar 5 is responsibility. It's just about it's just it isn't just about financial performance. It's actually about addressing what I call the practices, activities which we have on society and the environment. I think we do have a responsibility in relation to sustainability and viability of our environment. That's what's called CSR, Anna Maria. It's called corporate social responsibility.
Yes.
And I think practices need to start to think about more so about corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility. And I think the last one, pillar 6, is accountability. And this is about holding the individuals in the practice to account, your directors of the company, but also this is about bringing staff to account and me as a practice manager to account as well. And later on we might talk about, how do we bring people to account? But those 6 pillars, I think, steer the business clear of financial, legal, and ethical pitfalls.
I think that's right, Gary. And I think, when you talk about pillars, I think of it almost like as in physical pillars. And it's like you need all 6. If any of the 6 aren't there, then you're going to be tipping over. Something's not going to be working correctly. So I think it's a really good visual image as well, to think of these 6 pillars all need to be equally stable and in effect as well. I see that in that chapter 2, you talk about the importance of policies and procedures, which of course is something very dear to my heart. So very, very quickly, what do we want to highlight to our audience tonight about the importance of policies?
Well, they're the key and vital role of governance, which actually provides what we call a structured framework for any decisions which are made, Anna Maria, and accountability and consistency within a business. And I know this is a real pet of yours. That's why you've developed Practice Hub to the level by which it has done. So these policies and procedures are essential, what I call, to provide safe, efficient, and high quality patient care, because we are there for our community in delivering a quality of service. So when we're looking at, just quickly, Anna Maria, when we're looking at a policy in relation to governance, there's about 5 or 6 points, and I'll just quickly touch on them, that we need to consider. The purpose and scope of the policy, that's important. The objectives and goals of the policy or the procedure. Roles and responsibilities of the people involved in relation to the procedure or policy. How do we comply and enforce the policy or the procedure as a result of the governance? Mm-hmm. Reference and resources, that's an important part. What are the references we're going to provide? And of course, the last one is, of course, revision and review. There's no use putting a policy into place if we do not review it on a regular basis.
Exactly, because as we know, change is constant, and we need the policies and procedures need to keep up with those changes as well. Very good. All right. So again, another area close to my heart, still on chapter 2, is all about systems. And I do love this quote in the book from W. Edwards Deming, which is 94% of problems in business are systems driven and only 6% are people driven.
Yes.
And I think that is really, really worth remembering, isn't it? Good systems will solve many problems. And I think that's really important. So what do you see are some of the benefits of having good systems in place?
Well, firstly, I want to talk about some myths, about systems. We hear, and we've touched on this a little bit earlier, is that all systems they've always worked that way. So why do we need to change? We've spoken about that previously. Some people think that all systems are standalone, which they're not. Every system in your practice is linked to something else. And if one of the cogs are broken in the wheel, you're going to find that the balance of the systems will struggle as well. I want you to sit back and do a systems analysis of what is linked to what. And this diagram you've got on the screen, Anna Maria, is is just shows how things are linked together. Everyone thinks our current systems are relevant. Well, maybe they're not. But when we're looking at systems, and I've got some points, some points in relation to systems. So I've got some points around good systems are all about acknowledgement, and I think this is an important acknowledgement is really around there's an acceptance that a system is there, and once we accept there's a system is there. And we acknowledge that, and we acknowledge how it works. Good systems are, as I said, improve efficiency. Just think of the days, Anna Maria, when simple things like handwritten scripts for our clinicians used to write, and the patient would ring back up and say, "I've lost that script again." How do we survive without, automatic scripts? And now electronic scripts. Do you follow? Yes. So we can sit back and improving efficiency becomes part of our DNA, and it just keeps happening and keeps happening. So good systems improve efficiency. It provides consistency as well. Consistency, it's about consistency of process, consistency of outcomes. Patients like good systems improve patient satisfaction. The classic example of this one this day and age, Anna Maria, are online bookings.
Yep.
That's a classic example. Patient satisfaction, good system. Submitting claims to patients, private claims to Medicare for their rebate to go into their bank account. Good system, patient satisfaction. Good systems manage compliance, which is, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, but it manages compliance, and we have to be mindful of what compliance may be. And of course, good systems identify wastage within our system as well. So I might get Colleen to comment if she's got anything on that particular slide.
Yeah, I think that you've covered it pretty well there, Gary. I think that when you're thinking about systems, I think one of the thoughts that comes back is there is always a better way. We just don't lock ourselves in to the way we've always done things, and that is changing all the time, as you say, with the online bookings, and that is across the delivery of healthcare. Everything is changing, and we've got to change our systems to meet with those changes. Yep.
Anna Maria, there's actually a section in the book about designing a system.
Yes.
And this is really important. How do I design a system? But there's some principles around designing a system, Anna Maria. And every system has a purpose within a larger system, which we spoke about before. And this is what I call the interdependence. All the system parts must be present for the system to carry out its purpose optimally. A system's part must be arranged in a specific way for the system to carry out its purpose. Systems change to response to feedback, and that's so important. And systems maintain their stability by adjusting as a result of the feedback accordingly. So when we're designing systems or policies and procedures, there's some key principles that sit behind that as well.
Absolutely, Gary. I think the other thing too is that we know that if you have good systems in place, you're going to reduce the kind of, I guess, unintended variations in the way things are done. But also, again, if you have good systems in place, it's so much easier to integrate new services, new ways of doing things if you already have a structure to work with. So I think, I'm so conscious that practices today are always changing. There's always sort of new things that they need to address. My Medicare is a really good example. But if you've got a good system in place, it makes it so much easier to integrate these new things.
And Maria, I just want to touch on one component of good systems, and this is the importance of good systems. This resonates with your organisation as a medical defence organisation, the MDO, who you insure doctors on. It's around recalls.
Yes.
A good system minimises the risk associated with possible claims as a result of missed recalls of a patient. Now, when we're talking about good systems, we have to ensure that there is some commonality around the process of recalls. You can't have 10 doctors in a practice doing recalls 10 different ways, because that becomes a bad system. And we lose accountability, we lose consistency, we lose patient satisfaction, we lose compliance. All those things turn into a bad system. So recalls is this one example I use around what's a good system and what could happen as a result of a bad system. And it may end up with with your medical defence organisation.
Exactly. And that's one really good example of, if it doesn't go well, it can go very badly.
Yes.
So yes, that's a really good example. No, really good. As say, things like that, systems, policies, procedures, very close to my heart. Because I think also these systems, they are work initially maybe to set up, but I do think that they save time in the long run. And we're all dealing with limited resources in terms of human resources, other resources. So the time put into this, as you've got there on the slide, it does in the long run improve efficiency as well. So I think that's really valuable. All right, so should we move along to chapter 7, which is all about risk and compliance? But let's start with risk. And you've got a quote in the book, and Gary and I always laugh because he and I love talking about risk. We could do a whole hour on risk, couldn't we?
That's exactly right, Anna Maria.
Anyway, you've got a quote in the book which I really like, which is, the concept of risk is concerned with the uncertainty of outcomes. And so it occurs to me that, you know, if we can reduce risk, we are reducing uncertainty of those outcomes. But in the book, you highlight the need for a whole of business approach and the importance of practice culture. So how do you create that approach, and how do you embed that culture in the practice? What are your top tips on that one?
Firstly, Anna Maria, this is for all the Starship Enterprise people who are on tonight. And Colin and I actually start off in chapter 7, risk, which says, and this is from James T. Kirk from the Starship Enterprise, and he said, risk is our business. Nothing great can be accomplished if you are not willing to take some risk. I like to say, if failure is an option, then innovation isn't any opportunity. However, risk must be managed carefully. And I think the comment I want to make also is around risk is inherent in everything which we do. We will never eliminate risk. All we can attempt to do is minimize it. And risk is actually everyone's business, Anna Maria. It's just not me as a practice manager. It's the cleaner, it's the receptionist, it's my IT people. They all contribute to the risk framework or the risk matrix of my practice. So think about the concept of risk is everyone's business. I think one of the most important things, as what you just said, we need to understand the concept of risk the concept of risk management in the first place. So I think it's about the chance of an incident occurring that will have an impact on our practice as business objectives. Remember, so when there is an impact, what are the impacts? They could be financial impacts, but one of the big ones, Anna Maria, especially in our space, is reputational risk and the damage caused by reputational risk. So when we're talking about around risk, the concept of risk, we actually have to create a culture of risk awareness and management within our system. And we do this commencing right from our vision, our mission, our goals and objectives. Create an environment whereby people are willing to put their hand up. And that's what I call a just culture. We've got to restructure our culture that's okay to say, oh, something's not right. I saw something the other day today on a medical record. Oh, I actually gave the wrong injection to the wrong person. oh, that mat at the front door is twisted. We need to get that fixed. So everyone we create an environment to say, this is where the risks are. What does it mean to us all? One of the areas by which, of course, accreditation, which is your part of your DNA, Anna Maria, accreditation and policies, it talks about a risk management framework in accreditation, which is C3.5, whatever it may be. I don't know my numbers well, although I'm a surveyor. Where it says the practice identifies risks and puts into place strategies to minimise it and a monitoring process. So accreditation requires us to be aware of what risk is all about. Do we have risk on our, as a standard agenda item on our staff meetings? Do we have it on our doctors' meetings, our clinical meetings? Remember, once again, I keep coming back that risk is just not clinical. Yes. Risk is also about business. Yes. What about fraud?
Yeah. I think all too often, Gary, we think about risk as being either clinical or safety. And it's so much broader than that.
It is. And I suppose that, in the book, I think it's on page 193, I think it was, we've actually given what's called an umbrella of risk. And it's just like an umbrella. And it identifies all the areas of risk that you may be challenged with in your practice. And once again, the checklist at the end of that chapter goes through that. So think about creating a culture of risk awareness and management. Create a just culture where people put their hand up and say, this is what's happened, and identify the risk and how can we work with that. Because one of the things may be, Anna Maria, when we create a just culture and someone says, oh, this is what's happened, maybe it's not that individual person's fault. Maybe it's me as a manager where I haven't set the policy, the procedure or the framework correctly. So let's have this discussion around how can we improve this process.
Exactly. And I think probably, Gary, it goes back to that previous quote about the 94% of issues relate to the system. So the problem may not be the person, it may actually be the system has not been, is not suitable or is not as required for that process. So
and there's a reason why there's a cross or a tick put there by someone, because down the line, that cross or that tick means something in relation to managing of a risk process. Colleen, you got a comment around this? Because I know the three of us really, especially Colleen as well, risk is her is her baby on this as well. Colleen?
Well, I think that you've covered it well, and I think that in the book there are lots of not only examples but things that you can use to help manage risk in your practice. But I just think that realization that risk is just everywhere in everything we do every day, and you've made that point, Gary, about the culture and having a good risk management plan. I think that every practice really needs to have its own risk management plan, and I think it's worth developing and involving everybody in it, so that when you said it's not just it's not just in admin, it's not just the clinical or the doctors, it's right across the board. And I think for that awareness to be developed and encouraged within the whole practice would be a really important message to take from the discussion on risk.
And I think one thing you've done really well in the book, in section 7.4 there on managing risk, is there's lots of really practical tips and ways in which to do these things. So it breaks it down into really simple processes and makes it easy to kind of go, okay, I need to think about the whole of business. I need to include the stakeholders and all of these things that you need to incorporate as part of that risk management process as well.
And that's picking up on that risk management process, those 7 steps, which is there, and it's really important to follow. establishing the contents, identifying the risk, analysing it, evaluating it, and treating it. You know, communications, all of those steps are really important in managing risk in the practice. So, well worthwhile following. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess hand in hand with risk comes compliance. And, you know, you've talked earlier on this evening about, you know, rules of law and legislative requirements and things like that. So again, in chapter 7 there, you talk about the importance of compliance, but also saying that it needs to be integrated to cover things like financial risk, quality, environmental health and safety, and so on. Gary, every time I know a lot of people hear compliance and there's just kind of this sense of a weight landing on your shoulders, that it feels like it's a burden. So let's flip that round and talk about what are the benefits of compliance. So often we feel we're doing it for an external party, but what's the benefit internally for the business?
Oh, look, it gives you a sense of accountability, and you feel as if you are accountable yourself. Now, what happens in relation to accountability? Compliance programs, whatever they may be, they could be checklists, they could be audits, they could be a whole range of tools. But compliance programs that we have set up, I think, have a significant impact on patient satisfaction. Patient satisfaction, their value, and ultimately on the success of the practice. So when I talk about compliance, to me, it's around delivering of a high quality service to my patient, to our patient. So I think that is critical. I think that's a real benefit, that we are there for our community, and the compliance programs allow us to do that. But there's other things, as it says, it allows a practice to meet its legal and ethical requirements. Now, ethical requirements, once again, is an upside on this. If we run an ethical practice around compliance processes, that can only benefit the practice internally and also the patient. A culture of accountability, compliance does. And I suppose when we look at accountability, it's accountability not only to the practice itself, but also to ourselves. And I think these are around things like key resultant areas and key performance indicators. That's about accountability. And if I know that I'm meeting those, there's a lot greater satisfaction to myself and to the organisation I'm with. And I think it provides a safe environment in the delivery of services to your patients. Compliance can be greater, Anna Maria. Compliance can be things like the Corporations Act, you know, all those other legislation, the Fair Work Act, all those Anti-Discrimination Act. That's all compliance as well. But let's think about, we will deal with those, but let's look about compliance internally.
So I think too, and Gary, look, you mentioned Fair Work there, and I know that that can be an area where it's obviously, if you're not compliant, things happen there. The actual cost, both financial, emotional, psychological, of having to deal with these things if you're found not to be compliant can be really quite extreme and quite significant, can't they?
Anna Maria, you know this as well as I do. If you've had a doctor in your practice that's had to go through an investigation or a complaint from the HCCC because of allegedly non-compliance, you can actually see the psychological effect upon them over that period of time. And as a practice manager, my role is to support people through the compliance process accordingly. So it can be large, but the good thing about compliance, as long as we do the best we can, and we're fair, we're equitable, that goes a long way to managing compliance.
Yeah, brilliant. Very good. So over in chapter 8, you talk about service standards, and I was kind of surprised when I was first going through the book, because I feel like this is not an area we talk a lot about in healthcare management. So I think it's really good. I think it's really timely, and I think it's really relevant. So And it kind of works both ways. It's the standard of service we want to provide to our patients, but also the standard of service we expect to receive from our suppliers. So you talk in the book about service level agreements. So can you tell us a little bit about how what people need to consider when they're thinking about these agreements, service level agreements, in terms of the quality of service?
Yes, this is known as SLAs, or service level agreements. Really, there's nothing magic about this, Anna Maria. This is just a term which we use in relation to those levels of customer services that we provide to our internal customers, which are staff, and our external customers. These are the benchmarks. This is the level of service which I'm going to provide. So it's really around things like policies and procedures. And service level agreements say, I am going to do this, and I'm going to do this within the period of time. And a classic example of this is complaints. Have you got a service level agreement about complaints? Most practice say, I've got a policy, but hang on, what sits behind that? Well, the service level from my side is the fact that I must acknowledge a complaint within 3 hours. No matter where I am in the world, it's got to be acknowledged. I'm not solving it. I'm just acknowledging that we've got it. And this is what I'm going to do.
Yep.
Next part of service level agreement is set the timelines. I'll investigate and I'll get back to you on Thursday or next fortnight or whatever it may be. So service level agreements around how do I implement and what commitments am I going to make in relation to the service that I'm going to provide. Now, service standards are defined under 3 headings. I'll just quickly touch on them. Personally, it's around timeliness. How long patients, for example, how long patients wait to see a healthcare professional. The next one may be accuracy, is another component of a service standards. Is the information correct 100% of the time? And the last service standard is based around is what's called appropriateness. Are all patients' queries answered on time at that point in time? But we get challenged around service standards, around expectations and obligations. If we had another half an hour, we would talk about expectations and obligations, Anna Maria.
Yes.
Our patients' expectations or obligations. That actually frames the whole component of service standards. So when we're looking at service standards, we need to talk about patients' needs and expectations. Can I really deliver that? And have the discussion. What is your ability to deliver? And your ability to deliver and patients' expectations all fit into the desired business outcomes. Do I have the ability to deliver? Once I work out what needs and expectations are, what's my ability to deliver, I can then put together a service standard accordingly. Now, what determines service standards? There are 3 things that determine service standards. This is the desired level of service. So what's the level of service that I want to deliver? There's a thing called zone of tolerance, meaning that what will a patient put up with? And then there's the adequate level of service. Now, that zone of tolerance is where we play in times. How far can I push accordingly? So, they're the 3 determinants of customer service standards: desired level of service, zone of tolerance, and adequate level of service. But once again, Anna Maria, this really comes back to your vision, your mission, your values, your goals, and your objectives. It's all based around it's my reason for being.
That's right. It's kind of the foundation. Everything builds on that, doesn't it?
Everything builds on our reason for being.
Reason for being. Yes, very good. All right. So, of course, now we've put all these things in place. This is excellent. And now we need to think about monitoring our performance, Gary. So you talk about that over in chapter 8 as well. And I think, one of the quotes you've got there is that customer service is the responsibility of everyone in the practice. So we need to have, and that's similar to risk management, which you
exactly
said.
Right.
Basically, it's everyone's responsibility. So how are we going to embed that attitude, and how are we going to measure performance? What are your recommendations on what, because I think this is the thing, people get carried away with measuring stuff.
Yes.
And I think we measure what matters. So what matters? What do we want to measure?
But what you walk past is the standard which you set. And I've always believed that in monitoring performance. If I walk past and there's a piece of paper on the ground and I walk past it, I'm sending a message to my staff and my patients that I don't care. But if I bend down and pick it up, I send a message. So part of monitoring performance is really around what messages do I send. And when we look at this, is that part of it, to me, is about customer feedback or staff feedback. I think that is a great tool for monitoring performance is our patient feedback. Yes, we can have key performance indicators. They're great. We can have performance metrics. They're great. We can have data analysis. That's great. But I think that customer feedback and continuous quality improvement are some of the basis by which how we monitor performance. But I've put some points in this particular slide how we can do this. But I think if we look at this, I just covered up on some of these, but I think the first one is most important. Establish clear service standards. What are we measuring against? We've got to have something to measure against, like we measure against a position description statement, which I'll just quickly talk about. I know time's getting away. But when we put our position description statement together, there are things called KRAs, key result areas, and they are in finance, human resource management, and one should be customer service.
Yes.
Now, what sits under customer service are a series of key performance indicators. But those key performance indicators will vary depending upon the position. Do you follow? So let's set clear service standards, and we've got something to measure against. And that's the takeaway from that particular slide there.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the other thing, I know sometimes if it's not clear, how can you have performance discussions or set performance if you don't have those standards to be able to tie back to as well?
I'll give you an example. Post-operative phone calls, Anna Maria.
Yep.
Have we got a clear service standard about post-operative phone calls? If you don't have, well, you need to.
Yes.
People who have had post-operative procedures, a phone call needs to be made within 24 hours to see how they're going. You follow? These are what service standards are all about.
Yeah.
And how do we get measured against that? Was that phone call made? Yes, it was. No, it wasn't. Why wasn't it?
Yeah. No, really good example. All right, so we've skipped through quite a few sections of the book. So there's some other chapters around leadership, financial management, information management, and practice development, which we didn't touch on tonight, but I highly recommend. So Gary, Colleen, I know we haven't heard a lot from you, but it's been very valuable. So I believe we are going to have a look at who are our lucky winners. In the meantime, smartphones at the ready. The QR code on the screen will take you to a link where you can order a copy of the book. I think somebody just put in the chat on the Q&A just before, what is the title? There it is. That's the cover as well. Principles of Healthcare Practice Management, Your Handbook. I have to say, if I was using this book, I think, Gary, what I would do is in each chapter, I would go through the checklist, because things that I can tick off, if I'm ticking off the majority, then that's probably not a priority. But the ones where I'm not able to confidently tick things off, that would be my starting point.
Correct.
So I feel like it is just such a practical resource, in terms of in terms of helping people run their practice in really practical ways. It doesn't feel textbooky. It's extremely practical.
And as Colleen and I say, practice managers love checklists.
They do, absolutely. All right. So we might skip over to the next slide. I'm just conscious of time. I will announce our winners shortly, I believe. We have our little elves working in the background. Just while we're waiting, if you're going to the AAPM National Conference next month, don't forget you can book a one-on-one consultation with our specialists in either Practice Hub, practice management, people from the Avant law team for commercial and corporate law, and of course, our medical indemnity team. And if you visit the Avant stand, you can come and get your personalized luggage tag. And who doesn't love a lovely luggage tag to separate your luggage from everyone else's on the carousel when you're at the airport? There we go. I think I've covered most of that. All right, I have some winners to announce quickly. We have Percival. I'm hoping I'm going to say all these correctly. Yan Yan, Jenny, so I'll start with for all named. Percival Arasola, Yan Yan Howe, Jenny Alshan, Thomas Chalk, and Danielle Batt. Congratulations to the 5 of you. You will be shortly receiving your copies of the handbook. So thank you for joining us tonight. So just in conclusion, can I thank you all for attending? Thank you so much to Gary and Colleen. I am truly privileged and honoured that you have spent your evening with us tonight sharing your knowledge. We hope you as the attendees found this session valuable. Don't forget that we will be sending you a link to the recording. You will shortly receive a post-webinar survey. Pop-up will appear. We'd really appreciate you completing this. It really helps us in our planning for future topics. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for attending and wish you a very good evening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.